You are listening to episode 38. This episode is brought to you by my new course, How to Dominate LinkedIn with Your Personal Brand. Do you feel like when you're on the LinkedIn platform, you're not really sure how to actually navigate it? Does it feel clunky or confusing? And do you have all these connections, but you're not sure how to really leverage those connections and how to really show up virtually in presenting your personal brand? Well, that is what this course is about. Because since September, I've gone from 1,500 connections to about 8,000 connections on LinkedIn. Not only that, I've gotten clients through my content, and people have actually reached out to me to speak for virtual speaking engagements. So if this is something that you would really like to capitalize on and take advantage of and learn about, then this course is definitely for you. And you can learn about it more in my show notes, and I will have the link to the waitlist just for you. And now on with the show. On today's episode, I get to interview Amy Ostreicher. Now, when Amy first reached out to me to be a guest on my podcast, all I saw was that she was a PTSD specialist. And I thought, that's great, because I am a huge advocate for really taking care of your mental wellness. But when I got her full bio, well, let's just say I was gobsmacked by her story. Not only is she a PTSD specialist, she's actually an award-winning and award-nominated playwright, performer, and multidisciplinary creator. And if you know anything about my story and my journey with mental health, which I can definitely discuss at another time if that's what people are interested in for future episodes, you'll know that I actually could seriously resonate with her story of being a performer and actually finding healing from trauma through arts. And that is what she specializes in. She has not only overcome tremendous trauma, she has actually created a way to use her art and use her performing to actually help others as well. So she has been a writer with the Huffington Post, RAIN representative, and health advocate, as well as she has done 3 TED Talks, all on transforming trauma through creativity. She's also contributed to NBC's Today, CBS, Cosmopolitan, 17 Magazine, The Washington Post, Good Housekeeping, and MSNBC. And not only that, her multi-award-winning musical, Gutless and Grateful, has toured over 200 venues. So without further ado, I am so excited to introduce this guest and now great connection of mine, Amy Ostreicher, on today's episode. You are listening to the sounds of inspiration. Welcome to the Okiki podcast, where we make inspirational people known. Brought to you by your host, Fiyin Obayan. You are listening to the sounds of inspiration. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Okiki podcast. Today, I am honored to have the guest, Amy Ostreicher. And honestly, when I saw her bio, I was amazed. She is a sought-after PTSD specialist. But not only that, she's an artist, an author, and a writer for the Huffington Post. She has been an international keynote speaker and a RAIN representative, as well as a health advocate. She has given 3 TEDx talks on transforming trauma through creativity and has contributed to NBC's Today, CBS, Cosmopolitan, 17 Magazine, The Washington Post, Good Housekeeping, and MSNBC, among others. And outside of her contribution work
She has a vast bio when it comes to her actual performing and theater work as well, including a multi-award winning musical, Gutless and Grateful, that toured in over 200 venues. So I am so excited to have Amy on the show today. Thank you so much for being here, Amy.
Well, thank you for having me.
So do you mind telling our audience, how did you get into theater and how did that lead into you becoming a PTSD specialist?
Oh boy. Well, I did not get into theater. Like, I came into this world, I think, thinking my life was a musical. I mean, from the time I could remember, I was always, I think it was a combination of two things. I was always creating stories in my head, and I just always saw the hidden life in the world around me. You know, everything was animated and everything had a story to tell. And that's why, like, trees were my best friends from the time I could remember. So I guess I always found the song and rhythm and voice behind everything. And I loved just embodying that and bringing that to life. I mean, since I was, like 3. And I feel like I never lost that sense of both playfulness and curiosity. And then as I got older, as a teenager and found my role, and then literally roles in plays, it just always felt like my home. So, when I wasn't performing in one show, I was auditioning for the next, and writing my own stuff. So it's always just been a passion. It's interesting how that passion, led to PTSD and everything else. I started studying with a very prestigious voice teacher when I was 15 in New York, which was a big deal for this girl in Connecticut, taking the train in to, work with this really big deal. And he became my mentor because I realized, he realized that I really had this passion for the world and nature, which he understood too. And, as a teen, you always feel nobody gets you, and he really became my mentor.
Wow.
Then at the age of 17, he took advantage and I was sexually abused for nearly a year. And I froze. I didn't know that was the term at that point, but I didn't even understand what was going on. I just felt the term would be, out of body, like I was somewhere else and I was just going through the motions of everyday life. And I could just tell that like I wasn't my like vivacious, bubbly self anymore. And I thought something was wrong with me. And so I kept going back for lessons until I just felt physically something just did not feel good. Now I know that would be what like anxiety feels like, and just feeling in my stomach and this obviously repressed anger because I didn't know who to direct it at or what was going on. And then eventually, after a year, I finally found the words and I told my mom the April of my senior year. And I was, we were going to, get therapy and all the next steps. And then, perfect storm, 2 weeks later, I just started getting a very bad stomach ache that wouldn't go away. And to the point where my dad rushed me to the emergency room and I got sepsis. There was a blood clot on my mesenteric artery, which could have been a stress ulcer or something. But as soon as the surgeons cut into me, my stomach literally exploded because there was so much internal pressure.
Wow.
And so at 18, April 2005, when I just gotten all my college acceptance letters, I was, my parents were told I wouldn't make it through the night. And I was in a coma for months. Then when I woke up, feeling like, okay, what the heck just happened? Where am I? Twilight Zone. Doctors told me I didn't have a stomach anymore. I couldn't eat or drink. And they also didn't know when or if that would ever be possible again. So now I'm like, what the heck is going on? And I felt, as a teenager, like I'm in prison, like, and suddenly now on top of this, I can't even have an ice cube. And so eventually I was discharged from the hospital because I was stable now. Thankfully, I wasn't going to die. But the only thing was I had no stomach and there wasn't really a plan. There's not like a surgery where it's like, the illness of your stomach exploding, here's a surgery to give you a stomach. So I was told by doctors, you're being sustained on nutritional IVs, so you're okay. So just, try to stay positive and do your best. So then the problem became, okay, how do I live in the real world and do what I want to do and find a passion and a job and a role? All my friends are in college, but like, I can't even have a drink of water or an ice cube. Like, how am I supposed to function? Because, the IVs were giving me calories, but, if anyone ever tells you there's no emotional counterpart or psychological part of being hungry, they're crazy. So, I had to figure out, how do I be part of the world but ignore my hunger? And so I was able to use creativity as my safe container. Like, as soon as I was out of the ICU, I auditioned for Oliver and I got the lead. I couldn't eat or drink, but it was so healing being in community and doing what I love. And then I found creativity in other ways. Like, I was so hungry that all I wanted to do was play with food. So I started a chocolate business so I could have an excuse to buy candy and play with it. I journaled. I found any way that I could still get in touch with myself while ignoring like a huge part of yourself, which is hunger. So it definitely was not easy. And so to do that, imagine what it's like if we're talking about trauma now, having to, wanting to follow your heart and your passion and feel things, but you also have to intentionally avoid hunger, which is part of your body too. So I had to be very dissociated. And, it was very hard to connect fully with myself. And so once I could eat, finally, after more than 6 years and 27 surgeries, believe it or not, I thought that would just solve everything. But because food made me feel in a full capacity, this was also the first time I was even thinking about memories of my sexual abuse. Part of me thought like, oh, maybe a coma wiped out all the healing I had to do from that. That's done. So once I could eat, that's really when the emotional healing had to start. And that was actually the hardest for me, or equally hard, because physically I was all put together. So the outside world thought like, okay, she's fixed, like she's fine now. And so part of me almost felt guilty, like, well, shouldn't I be? Shouldn't I be completely moving on? I knew nothing about mental health. I knew nothing about PTSD. I had never seen a therapist through all this. So I was feeling guilty and I was blaming myself, like, I'm dragging on my recovery. It's my fault. Like, shouldn't I be grateful? And so actually, I learned about PTSD because, I had originally gotten into college in the musical theater program at University of Michigan, which I was so excited about. Now, by this time I was 25. And I figured, what? I have enough life experience. Maybe I don't need college. But after my 27th surgery at 25, I applied to Hampshire College, which really changed my life. And I also ended up taking my very first science course. And the course was called The Science of Stress. And we had to pick a final topic. And I didn't know what to do. I could barely make it through those labs. And so I was thinking, like, what if I researched how, like, stress affects my life? And so I ended up researching PTSD, learning about it, because I was also taking a psychology course at the time. And I wanted to find a connection between the mind and body. And then I started learning about all these cases, how PTSD and the freeze response affect your mind and body. All of these studies of female sexual abuse survivors with gastrointestinal problems. But it really opened a whole world where I learned that what PTSD does. And it really inspired me to figure out, like, okay, how was I able to heal in my own ways through creativity and bringing things back into my body, and how can I make a difference? And so I had learned so much through kind of figuring out myself, what I now call my 4 skills to resilience. And so, that turned into doing what I love to do, like going back to theater, but with an even more forceful, like, calling. I ended up touring my one-woman musical about my life, Gutless and Grateful, and sharing my story in my own words through doing what I love. And then once I learned about PTSD, I started combining it with talkbacks and workshops for college students, and then for disability organizations, and then for conferences and mental health, keynotes and stuff, all about how creativity can help us transform trauma into personal growth and then community change. So I think and since then I've gone on to write so many plays, and I've toured 2 one-woman musicals. I've just gotten into puppetry arts. So I guess the best part is I'm back to doing what I always loved as a kid, but with even more power and something to say and something that can really help other people. So I think that's why I love what I do.
Wow. I really just
and that was a Cliff Note version.
Yeah, no, and honestly, the journey, right, of even overcoming that traumatic situation, and actually having the courage to even go out and still perform and still show up. Because one of the things that I learned in my experience in theater school was literally just how exposed you really felt. Especially when it's funny because I always enjoyed performing, but one of the things I didn't expect when I got in that training was how exposing it really felt when you're trying to refine your process in it. And so I feel like it's incredibly brave that you not only overcame that situation, but you still put yourself out there. Apparently only like 1% of the world will do that. So that's already really interesting. And then what also grabs my attention is your ability to try and find other ways to express yourself in spite of the limitations. So for a while you couldn't use your stomach, and you talk about how you found other ways to enjoy the senses of food that didn't involve actually you feeling the food. So there's just so many interesting points in there. One of the parts I want to also get into is that creative process of creating art. Yeah, so I kind of want to backtrack a bit. You talked about how really the introduction of eating and feeling that sensation kind of led you into realizing you had to do healing. And so I wanted to talk about that aspect for some people who may be listening to the show who might just be coming to terms with a feeling or something in their past that's coming up that might be triggered by something. What was part of the process that you went through to have that healing? Because as you mentioned, you had PTSD, and people often associate that to, like, war veterans and different things. But
Exactly.
If you don't mind breaking down that.
No, of course. Yeah, a loaded response to that. First of all, I realized that there's no one path to recovery, but a good recovery is a few steps forward and a few steps back. And that's what it was for me for a very long time. And I think that's the process we all have, period, because healing is an ongoing process. So when you say, creativity was definitely the healthiest container I could find, where I could finally find a way to be with my emotions in a way that didn't feel overwhelming. Because I think when we try to run from emotions like grief and anger, uncertainty, those are all examples of yucky emotions that we don't really like experiencing. And so we usually run the other way. And we do that in a variety of ways. We, through numbing out to those things like grief and anger and, and fear. We can repress them. And, find destructive coping mechanisms to do that. That's why some people turn to alcohol or too much social media or overexercise or drugs or things like that. So those are all containers to deal with them that are not healthy. So the point is you need to find your own healthy container. And the wonderful thing about creativity is you don't need to be like an artist to be creative. Creativity, is just energy. We all have energy. And what I realized is, energy is like water. It just fills whatever container you put it in. So like when I couldn't talk because I had a tracheotomy and I really just wanted to sing, I had to filter that energy through other things like pointing my toes and imagining I was doing a dance where like that's when you might want to smell spices and cook a recipe. Creativity is, my definition is any way we can see something from another angle. And also it's very important when healing from anything that we don't just heal through our mind, like cognitive therapy, like talk about how we're feeling, because healing is like a whole body effort. So we need to find some way to embody it, whether it's like moving or even like walking or dance or something physical where like, finding a grounding technique. That was a big part of my healing. Like, okay, I'm feeling this hot counter. I'm feeling my toes on the ground. Because, I had to hide a lot in my mind and my thoughts to ignore, feelings that I tried to shut out. And I found that only when I could bring it into my body, could I really move through it. Because it's one thing, talking about that, like, oh, I know I should, feel this grief and, but to really feel it and find ways to be okay with it, that's when you really, move through it. So for me, creativity was the point, to find ways to feel these things in my body and be okay with it. And one other thing I want to say about, theater, you're right. It is like a very revealing process. We have to be vulnerable and we have to go there. I got to say, it was very interesting, being spit out of the ICU, and my first lead role I get is Nancy in Oliver, which, she's a battered woman talking about how she keeps going back to her abuser. And, at that time, I could feel like enough, but I still couldn't feel too much because I couldn't eat or drink and I didn't want to get too hungry. So, it was a tricky game I was playing that, like, do I want to go into like this whole pathway of what the abuse made me feel? And I think in a way I was still a little numb, which is why when I could eat, like, all the floodgates came open. And, I work a lot with survivors of assault. A lot of people ever since the Me Too movement have asked, like, what is the best way to help people overcome barriers to reporting? How can we start talking about it? And the most important thing I want to share, not only for survivors of assault, but really for any survivor of trauma that has gone through the freeze response, is it took me, now I'm talking about it all the time, but it took me 10 years before I could put into words what had happened to me. And that was important. Like, that means for all those years, I needed time to process it through other ways besides words for myself. Because, trauma comes to us not in linear, cohesive thoughts. It comes to us in sounds and sights and sensations. So I needed to make it through art. I needed to express it in a song. But I wasn't ready to write essays about it and tell my story. I needed that time for me. And I think it's important that every survivor of anything honors that there is no timeline, like a set timeline. Everyone's process is different. What's important is that you use the moments you can to find ways to slowly dip your toes in what's going on inside, even if it's just for a little bit. And then when it's too hard, you find something else to do. You find a distraction, like you watch TV or something. I call it cycling in and out of trauma. You don't want to re-traumatize yourself, but you tell yourself, for 5 minutes, I'm going to get a piece of paper and a crayon, and I'm just going to doodle however I'm feeling right now. And you go there a little bit till you feel that slight sensation of, oh, what is that? Oh, that's a little tear I feel. That's a little, sensation of grief or anger I feel. And then when it's too much, you put it away and you do something else for yourself. You lie down, you pet your dog. But that's how you cycle in and out. And slowly you'll be able to cycle more into what feels, into that trauma a little bit more at a time, and you go patiently and loving to yourself till eventually you can dip into it enough to move through it. And, I published my memoir last year, and it's called My Beautiful Detour, because I realized that all these, through this, finding ways to slowly dip into what happened to me, I realized that everything that happened in my life that I didn't expect led to something else that otherwise I never would have realized about myself. And it really has been a beautiful detour. But, while you're going through it, it doesn't feel like that. But I think it takes, when we're able to make this space, we can really see how trauma has enriched our lives.
And I loved how you talked about that process of healing. I think that would be really good for our audience to just really, see it differently, because I have to say, I am aware of CBT therapy and all that, but I never thought of actual, the creative senses as being kind of part of it. Like you said, the coloring, like all of that, just really thinking about all that as part of the healing process. So I love that. Another question I want to ask you is that you have a really prolific writing career here. You've contributed to so many publications, and you have a lot of plays and productions that you've written. And I know that some people coming through a trauma and coming through some of these experiences are actually a bit exhausted. So I wanted to ask, how did you regain the energy to create so much work and such a vast library of work and productions? Because as someone with this background, I'm just quite amazed by what I'm reading here and how many
that's what I'm saying, though. People are saying, listen, I've given 3 TED Talks. I'm giving my 4th one next month. You're actually the first person publicly I've told. I've published my memoir. I have 2 more books coming out. I mean, I've done a ton, but please understand that for the first 10 years after, I was just, doodling to myself in my room or doing nothing, it takes time. And the truth is, I'm also very thankful that during this time, I didn't have any internet. I wasn't on Facebook. I didn't have social media. So I didn't really have an option to share. The truth is, I worry about, oh God, what would I have shared if that were a thing? Because I think there is a danger to sharing before we're ready to, I needed that time to make a lot of stuff and then just sit with it myself and know it was for me. And I worry we're in an age where it's so easy to just do something and just post it, that we're not taking any time that it does something for us and moves it to the next step. So I think, forget about, having the energy to it. You do what feels good to you. And if you're present enough for that, it will do something for you that moves you to whatever next step you need to be right now. And that's what creativity has always been for me. It's been kind of my internal compass that tells me where I need to go next. That's what I have to say about that. Great. There's no pressure. It's for you. And that honestly is my fear right now with me, especially now that we're all home and in our Zoom boxes, that it's okay to create stuff just for you. It's also okay to just create breath, and just sometimes I have to remind myself that we have the power to create just by inhaling and exhaling. That's how we make a mark right here. And I'm not being poetic right now. It's really true. I mean, how many times a day do you just stop yourself and be like, all I'm going to do right now is just focus on a deep breath in and out. And maybe I'm just speaking for me personally, but whenever I do that, I'm like, oh crap, I have not been breathing today, have I? I've just been going, going, going. So I think that's what we should be pressuring ourselves more to do than anything else.
Very cool. And I wanted to ask you, what was the first workshop you got to do in leading with this area of using creativity for trauma?
Oh yeah. Oh,
What was your most memorable moment of it? Yeah.
Oh boy. So I actually write about this in my memoir because I knew nothing about conferences. Like so the story behind this is I premiered my one-woman musical, Gutless and Grateful, in New York in 2012. And it was a dream come true. And then I think, once I went to college and I started learning about like the whole big wide world around there or out there, I just started learning about these conferences. And then, I also realized that people came up to me after my show and started telling me about their own experience. And I was like, wow, theater actually makes my story relatable. Like I can talk about my stomach exploding, but people are sharing stories about any kind of detour in their life because they resonate with the arc of, sudden change and finding resilience and healing. And I want to just share it more. And so I started Googling conferences and calls for speakers. And my musical director, was like, Amy, your show is for theaters. It's not for students. It's not for conferences. I'm like, no, I know there's something to this. And so I just started Googling and Googling. One thing about me is my energy just does not end. Anyone that knows me will know that. So I found one conference and I was really struck by the title. It was called the Power of Words Conference in Kansas City, which I figured was in Kansas, but no, it was Kansas City, Missouri. And so I'm like, this looks fun. And so I submitted this whole proposal. And after I submitted it, I felt like it was also a way in writing the proposal, which was probably 5 times longer than they wanted. I could also kind of figure out and frame, really how could this, be for everyone. So it was like a way of journaling for me. And then I found out a few weeks later that I got it. And it was I felt it was really a moment I'll never forget. I started crying I was going to be a leader for the first time. That being said, I didn't know anything about how conferences work. I was leading a breakout session. And I didn't realize, when you're leading these conferences, you usually have to still pay for the conference. It's just a little discounted. And you have to pay for transportation and everything. And it was in Kansas City and I'm in Connecticut. So it wasn't the most economical decision. Flying over I flew over my whole family. We made a little trip out of it in Missouri. And you know how these conferences work. I'm performing my show for an astounding classroom of 4 people. But it was and for me, I was floating on air because I had proven to myself that, and other people, it was the first time I was doing anything like that. And then I was just hooked. I'm like, I want to work with people. I want to perform, but I want to make a difference through what I'm doing. And eventually that did lead to keynotes and bigger and better things. But I also realized that every conference is an opportunity to meet new people, find new ideas, and it opened your world. And that really came full circle because 4 years later, I went back to the same conference, which was now in Vermont, but I was the keynote speaker. And the Transformative Language Arts Network, that's what it was for. It's part of Goddard College's program. And now I'm actually a grad student in Goddard's interdisciplinary arts program. And as a graduate student, I'm 33, and Goddard has changed my life. And I keep reminding them I'm like, you guys changed my life back in 2013. So it's very cool.
So cool. And yeah, no, I love that. And I love your resilience to like show up. And even though it's like it started small, it eventually led you to these keynotes and these huge opportunities. And yeah, just believing in the vision. Also, what was one of your what was one of your most memorable moments with working with someone in one of these workshops so far that you can discuss?
Oh my God, so many. Where do I start? Let me think. Oh, actually, one was oh God, it's hard picking one. At the Mental Health America conference, I would say, the theme was well, it was called Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, but it was all about how, creativity can help us like form resilience and things like that. So I actually led a songwriting workshop, which was really wonderful. I talked about how songwriting can help us give a form and then eventually words through what we've been through. And at the end, someone came over to me saying, listen, I want you to know that like I always loved playing guitar as a kid. And then, some trauma happened in my life and I stopped playing and I couldn't go back to it. And I never really understood why. But after doing this, I realized, why it was so hard to go back to it. Because, I realized that music really puts us back into our bodies. But after doing this workshop, I feel like I have the confidence to start again. So, that's just one of the many different things. And then like, I actually, the best kind of feedback I get is working with someone who, starts with their arms crossed, saying like, I'm not an artist, I don't do creative things. Especially, I've worked with military veterans who, I do theater as a form of embodiment for them. And a lot of them are like, oh, what's this theater kind of stuff? But then the ability to actually embody a role and give a voice where you don't necessarily have to speak as yourself, but, you can still like make a mark and, have a different filter to say it through. And the human transformation is always really amazes me, and it's so rewarding.
Wow, that's so amazing. And my last question for you is, what do you value the most today about your role and what you get to do for people?
Oh my God. Again, shining light on the fact that, you don't have to be an artist to be creative. Creativity is something we all have. A lot of us get told like, from our fourth grade teacher, like, oh, that's interesting. Or, well, maybe I'm just speaking for my dad that, he was told by his like fourth grade teacher, you can't draw. And he never picked up a crayon again in his life. But it's not about thinking about what it should look like. It's really something we all can access and we all should. Yeah. So that's what when I can empower people with that, it's always really nice.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Amy, for really sharing your story. It's so inspirational. And I love hearing how you really overcame so much, but not only that you're really using your life mission to help others to be empowered to do that. It's just so admirable. And yeah, I'm really touched by your story and also your mission. So thank you for your contribution in that.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, for sure. And where can the audience learn more about you and your projects and what you're up to?
So my website has everything. That's www.amyoes.com. I'm also on the Facebook, Amy Ostriker, which I'm sure you'll give me your show notes. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, all that. But go to my website and subscribe. You'll get all the info. And also, my memoir is out, and that, is not only my story, but how I healed and tips for everyone how to heal. It's called My Beautiful Detour, an Unthinkable Journey from Gutless to Grateful. I've given 3 TED Talks too, which you can look up. And also, very exciting update, as of last week, I just finished narrating all 60 chapters for my memoir. So my beautiful detour is gonna be an audiobook. So yes. I cannot tell you how excited I am. I'm including some musical clips and some little guest appearances and some surprises along the way. So, oh my gosh, get the audiobook. But you can learn more about the book and all that at amyoes.com/book.
Awesome.
Where you'll get all that stuff. You can see my TEDx talk at same website /TEDx. My website will have everything, and you can always email me at lovemydetour@gmail.com. And if you have any kind of detour in your life, that you want to share, you tag it at #lovemydetour, and you'll find a whole community of detourists. And if you want to learn more about what a detourist is, watch my first TED Talk.
I love it. Thank you so much, Amy. I will definitely be checking out your TED Talks after this interview. And like I said, it's just such a great, just an honor to connect with you, hear your story, and find someone who I actually can relate to a little bit.
So yeah, of course. And we'll talk. Well, thank you for having me.